The steel door of the safe swung open with a sound like a held breath finally released, and Elena Marsh found herself staring at something impossible. Rows of leather-bound journals, stock certificates in plastic sleeves, and a single envelope with her name written in her grandmother's careful script. But that would come later, after the winter that tried to break her, after the divorce that stripped her of everything she'd spent a decade building. 6 weeks earlier, Elena had stood in the lobby of the King County Courthouse in Seattle, Washington, holding a manila folder that contained the dissolution of her marriage and most of her adult life. The judgment was final. The house in Ballard would be sold, proceeds split evenly after Daniel's lawyer had successfully argued that Elena's inheritance from her grandmother, $43,000 deposited into their joint account 5 years ago for the down payment, constituted a gift to the marriage. The retirement accounts, similarly divided. Her graphic design business, built from their spare bedroom, was valued at $31,000 based on the previous year's income, and Daniel was awarded half as compensation for supporting her entrepreneurial risk. Elena was 34 years old, and when the calculations were finished, she had $67,000 from the settlement and nowhere to live in a city where one-bedroom apartments started at $2,100 monthly. Daniel's attorney had been efficient and ruthless in ways that still left her breathless. Every text message where she'd complained about work stress was reframed as evidence of instability. Every business expense was scrutinized. The carefully documented evidence of Daniel's affair with his colleague Jennifer, the hotel receipts, the text messages Elena had found on the iPad they shared, was dismissed as irrelevant to asset distribution in a no-fault divorce state. The house sold in 4 days for $840,000. After the mortgage, realtor fees, and Daniel's lawyer's costs, Elena's half was $67,400. She'd already spent $8,200 on her own attorney and $1,100 on temporary housing in an extended-stay motel near the airport, where the walls were thin and the parking lot smelled like motor oil and despair. By late November, with Seattle's winter rain hammering down 16 hours a day, Elena had toured 43 apartments. Every application required first month, last month, security deposit, and proof of income at 3 times the monthly rent. A threshold her freelance design work, still recovering from the disruption of divorce proceedings, couldn't consistently meet. The few rooms for rent situations she could afford were in houses with 5 other people, shared bathrooms, kitchen privileges negotiated like hostage terms. She was sitting in her 2011 Subaru outside a coffee shop in Fremont, eating a $6 sandwich that would be both lunch and dinner, when the certified letter arrived via email from an attorney in Spokane. Her grandmother's estate, which Elena had assumed was fully settled 3 years ago, had one remaining asset, a cabin on Lake Chelan, deeded solely to Elena, property taxes paid through a trust fund for the next 20 years. Assessed value, $38,000. The attorney's email was apologetic. Property was discovered during a title search related to adjacent land development. Your grandmother appears to have maintained it separately from her primary estate. Records indicate the structure is over 60 years old and has been unoccupied for approximately 15 years. No utilities connected. Condition unknown. You may accept ownership or disclaim within 45 days. Elena pulled up satellite images on her phone. Lake Chelan stretched like a blue knife through the Cascade Mountains, 55 miles long, one of the deepest lakes in the United States. The cabin's location was marked on the far northwestern end, accessible via a private road off Highway 971, miles from the resort town of Chelan itself. The satellite view showed a small rectangular structure surrounded by dense forest, a dock extending into the water, isolation so complete it looked like a punishment. She checked her bank account, $57,900 remaining. Seattle rent would consume that in 22 months, faster if she couldn't stabilize her income. The cabin would cost nothing except utilities she'd have to restore, and it was hers, fully, legally, in her name alone. Elena made the decision in the Subaru's front seat while rain turned the windshield into a blur of gray. She would go to Lake Chelan, make the cabin habitable enough for winter, and give herself 6 months to rebuild her business without the crushing overhead of Seattle rent. She loaded everything she still owned, 2 suitcases of clothes, her computer equipment, a box of kitchen supplies, a sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees, and drove east over Snoqualmie Pass on a Tuesday morning in early December. The landscape transformed from rain to snow, from urban density to mountain vastness. For hours later, she turned onto a gravel road marked only by a faded wooden sign, "Private Drive, Lake Access." The road climbed for 2 miles through pine forest, snow deepening with elevation, before opening onto a clearing. The cabin stood 30 feet from the lake shore, a single-story structure with log siding weathered to gray, a stone chimney, and windows covered with plywood. The roof sagged slightly. The front porch was missing 2 boards. A padlock secured the door, rusted but solid. Elena sat with the engine running, heater blasting, and felt the full weight of her situation settle like snow accumulating on branches. This was her grandmother's secret, her inheritance, her last option. She turned off the engine and stepped into the mountain silence. The key was in the packet from the Spokane attorney, taped to an index card with an address written in faded pencil. Elena's hands shook from cold and something else as she fitted it into the padlock. The mechanism turned smoothly, recently maintained despite its appearance, and the door swung inward with a groan that echoed across the frozen lake. The interior was a single large room, maybe 600 square feet, with a riverstone fireplace dominating one wall, a kitchenette with a rust-stained sink, and 2 doors leading to what looked like a bedroom and bathroom. Everything was covered in dust thick enough to hold footprints. Mouse droppings littered the floor. The air smelled of decay and abandonment, and something else. Something Elena would later recognize as the scent of a place deliberately preserved. She'd stopped in the town of Chelan to buy supplies: a kerosene heater, firewood, bottled water, canned soup, batteries, candles. The total was $243, and she'd felt each dollar like a small wound. Now she set up the heater in the center of the room and began the work of making the cabin survivable. The chimney, miraculously, was clear. She built a fire with which she found stacked under a tarp beside the cabin, bone dry, carefully stored, as if someone had known it would be needed. The bedroom contained a metal bed frame with a mattress so deteriorated it was essentially a colony of mice, which she dragged outside and left in the snow. The bathroom had a toilet and a shower stall, both non-functional without water. By nightfall, with the fire burning and the kerosene heater glowing, the temperature inside reached 55 degrees. Livable if she stayed in the sleeping bag. Elena ate cold soup from the can and tried to ignore the creaking sounds of the cabin settling, the scratch of branches against the windows, the profound darkness beyond the firelight. She would need to restore water service, which meant finding the well system. She would need electricity, probably a generator until she could afford solar panels. She would need to make this place functional enough to work, to live, to survive the winter. The impossibility of it all pressed down like the weight of the snow accumulating on the roof. The next morning, Elena explored the cabin's perimeter in bright sunlight that made the lake sparkle like hammered metal. She found the well house, a small shed containing a pump system that looked salvageable. She found a propane tank, empty but intact. She found a woodshed with enough split logs to last months. And she found something else, a cellar door, angled against the cabin's foundation, secured with a combination lock that was distinctly newer than anything else on the property. The lock was modern, digital, designed for security rather than simple privacy. Elena stared at it for a long moment, her breath misting in the December air, and felt something shift in her understanding of this place. Her grandmother had been a careful woman, a Boeing secretary for 37 years, a widow who'd lived modestly in Spokane and left an estate of $127,000 split between 3 grandchildren. She'd never mentioned Lake Chelan, never spoke of owning property anywhere except her small house on Maple Street. The cabin was absent from every family story, every photograph, every conversation Elena could remember. She tried obvious combinations: her grandmother's birthday, her grandfather's birthday, the year they married. Nothing worked. She searched the cabin for 2 hours, methodically checking every drawer, every cabinet, every book on the dusty shelf above the fireplace. Most were romance novels from the 1970s, their pages yellowed and brittle. But one was different, a hardcover copy of Gift from the Sea by Maura Lindbergh, and inside the front cover, written in pencil and nearly invisible, were 6 numbers: August 16th, 47. August 16th, 1947. Her grandmother's birthday. Elena's heart hammered as she knelt by the cellar door and entered the combination. The lock clicked open with a sound like a promise being kept. The cellar stairs descended into darkness that smelled of concrete and preserved air. Elena used her phone's flashlight, and motion sensor LED strips flickered to life. Battery-powered, recently installed, impossibly out of place in this abandoned cabin. The cellar was small, maybe 8 feet by 10, with concrete walls and a dehumidifier that hummed to life when she reached the bottom step. Against the far wall stood a safe, gunmetal gray, with a mechanical combination dial. Elena approached it slowly, her phone light casting sharp shadows. There was a label on the safe's door, a piece of paper in a plastic sleeve, and on it, written in her grandmother's handwriting, "For Elena. The combination is the day we planted the garden." Tears blurred Elena's vision. She remembered that day. She'd been 8 years old, visiting her grandmother in Spokane, and they'd spent an afternoon planting tomatoes and marigolds in the small backyard. It had been May 23rd, Elena's birthday. Her grandmother had said they were planting hope. May 23rd, 88. The dial turned smoothly under her shaking fingers. The safe door swung open. Inside were stacks of leather journals, their covers embossed with years: 1962, 1975, 1988, 2003. Stock certificates in plastic sleeves. Microsoft, Boeing, Starbucks, Amazon. Purchased decades ago when they were nearly worthless. Bank statements from accounts Elena had never heard of. And on top, a white envelope with Elena written in careful cursive. She sat down hard on the concrete floor and opened the envelope with numb fingers. The letter was dated 3 years earlier, written in her grandmother's precise handwriting on stationery that smelled faintly of lavender. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, you found the lake house, and you've needed it. I bought this cabin in 1968 with money I earned separately, kept separately, and never told your grandfather about. Not from dishonesty, but from necessity. I loved him, but he believed a woman's money belonged to her marriage. I believed a woman's money belonged to her future. I was right. The investments started with $200 from my first paycheck at Boeing, invested against your grandfather's wishes in a company called Microsoft that nobody thought would survive. I continued for 41 years, small amounts, carefully documented, kept in accounts he never knew existed. The lake house was my guarantee, a place that was mine alone, that no one could take in divorce or disaster, or the thousand small ways the world tries to strip women of their foundations. You'll find stock certificates worth approximately $890,000 as of this writing. The journals contain every transaction, every decision, 41 years of financial independence maintained in secret. It's all legal, all taxed through separate returns I filed, as married filing separately. My attorney in Spokane has the documentation. I'm leaving this specifically to you because I see in you what I saw in myself. The need to build something beautiful combined with the terrible vulnerability of trusting someone else to protect it. If you found this place, something has stripped you bare. This is your foundation. Don't let anyone take it again. Grandma Ruth. Elena sat in the cellar holding the letter while tears ran down her face and the LED strips hummed their mechanical song. She pulled out the stock certificates with shaking hands and calculated roughly. Microsoft shares purchased in 1986, Boeing shares from the 1970s, Amazon from 1997, Starbucks from 1992. Even conservative estimates put the portfolio's current value near $1.2 million. She climbed back up the cellar stairs into the winter sunlight and called the Spokane attorney whose card was in the envelope. His voice was warm, expecting her call. Yes, Ruth Paulson's separate estate was fully documented. Yes, the investments were legitimate. Yes, the taxes were current. The portfolio could be liquidated or maintained, Elena's choice entirely. Transfer of assets would take approximately 30 days. Elena stood on the cabin's broken porch, looking out at Lake Chelan's frozen expanse, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, but breaking free. Her grandmother had lived with a secret for 41 years, had smiled through family dinners and holiday gatherings while maintaining a fortress of independence that no one could see. She'd watched Elena get married, had never said a word of warning, had simply built this failsafe and waited. The next 3 months transformed both Elena and the cabin. She hired a local contractor to restore the well system, install a propane furnace, and repair the roof. Paying cash from the small portion of stock she liquidated immediately. She bought a generator and solar panels. She replaced the windows, patched the porch, and restored the dock that extended into the lake. The work cost $47,000, but it was an investment in a home that was entirely, legally, permanently hers. She set up her design business in the main room, with a desk facing the lake and internet service from a line-of-sight tower 12 miles away. Without Seattle's overhead, she could be selective about clients, could charge what her work was worth. By March, she was earning $6,800 monthly, more than she'd ever made in her marriage. In April, Daniel's attorney sent a letter demanding to know about Elena's undisclosed inheritance that had supposedly occurred during the marriage. Elena's new attorney, a sharp woman in Wenatchee who charged $425 hourly and was worth every penny, responded with Ruth Paulson's death certificate from 3 years post-divorce, documentation that the cabin had been discovered in a subsequent title search, and a polite suggestion that Daniel's attorney review Washington state law regarding post-divorce assets before wasting everyone's time. Elena never heard from them again. In May, on what would have been her grandmother's 95th birthday, Elena planted a garden in the clearing beside the cabin: tomatoes, marigolds, lavender. She worked the soil with her hands and cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being saved by someone who'd understood exactly what she would need and when she would need it. The journals became her evening reading. Ruth's entries were sparse, factual, focused on financial decisions and their reasoning. But between the lines was a story of quiet rebellion, of a woman building freedom in $200 increments while the world told her she already had everything she needed. By June, when summer tourists filled the Lake Chelan resorts 50 miles south, Elena had completed work for 12 clients, saved $34,000 beyond her emergency fund, and made the cabin into something more than shelter, a home that felt like her grandmother's arms, holding her upright when she couldn't stand alone. She kept the stock portfolio mostly intact, living off her design income and the security of knowing the foundation was there. She framed her grandmother's letter and hung it above her desk. She swam in the lake at sunrise, worked through the mountain afternoons, and fell asleep in the silence that had once felt like punishment, but now felt like peace. In July, a real estate developer contacted her about purchasing the cabin and surrounding land. They were assembling parcels for a luxury resort. The offer was $425,000. Elena declined within 5 minutes. This place wasn't for sale at any price. It was the answer to a question her grandmother had asked 41 years ago. What does a woman need to be free? The answer was complicated and simple at once. A place of her own, money no one else controlled, and the absolute certainty that she could survive whatever came next. Elena had been given all three. She stood on the dock one evening in late summer, watching the sunset turn Lake Chelan into liquid gold, and felt the last pieces of the divorce finally, truly release their grip. Daniel had taken her house, her savings, her sense of security. But he'd accidentally delivered her to the one place where she could discover what her grandmother had known all along. That being broken down to nothing was sometimes the only way to find out you'd been carrying your own foundation all along. You just never learned to stand on it. The cabin wasn't a rescue. It was a revelation. And Elena was finally, completely home.